We're moving soon from that street. Well, that's what I found when I dug. Has it turned out to be what you expected, your road along the way, do you think? I was thinking about mine. I have a tried and tested love relationship going back several decades, for which I'm profoundly grateful, and I have great kids as part of a blended family, and we have a brood of little nestlings pecking away at our ankles when we get home. I have a few good friends, and I have a sea of colleagues and adventures and accomplishments along the way that I look at every so often, and I have a few trinkets and treasures that I keep, just a few, and I've made some mistakes, and I've known some disappointments, but in thinking about it, I never could have imagined that that would be the road down which I would have gone. Can you imagine the road down which you've gone, starting with be careful and ending up here? It is strange indeed. Well, for Abraham, the visit of the three strangers marked one of those crossroads where his road met the great road. You know, we may be entertaining angels unaware ourselves. Have you thought of that? Some visitors you meet along the way are great in their own right, but they don't do you a great deal of good. It's just nice to meet them. We met the Queen, almost. She was doing walkabout on her 50th anniversary of her reign, and we were in the little Scottish town of Wick. And she was going to walk right up the square, not much of a square, and we had placed ourselves an hour and a half early right against the front barrier so that when Her Majesty walked by, we could meet her. Well, soon you saw the little pink hat in the distance and the purse over the arm, and you knew who that was. And up she came, and just then a little Scottish woman, about 4 feet tall, elbowed her way into the front, elbowed me right in the ribs about 4 times, and said, "I've got to stand in the front. The Queen and I are the same age. I've got to wave at her." So, since I could well see over her, I let her stand there a while, and Her Majesty walked by just less than a meter away. But being good citizens of the Empire and members of the Commonwealth, you know you can't speak until you're spoken to. So she walked by, and I went, and about a meter away, some man yelled out, "Greetings from Dallas, Texas, Your Majesty." And she went over and talked to him for 10 minutes. And as she walked out of the square, I ran out into the street saying, "I'm from Canada." It did no good whatsoever. Well, it was lovely almost to meet her, and she's great in herself. I have great respect for her, but sometimes you meet people who are more than they appear, and the impact of the meeting lasts forever. I'm thinking about how I got here, aren't you? Dr. McNabb emailed me a note one day in response to something I'd sent to him. We'd never even met each other, and 2 years later I received a little email from him saying, "Would you come down here for 3 weeks?" I couldn't believe it. And occasionally you meet a really great person. I've met a few in my life, a really great person, and I've only met Dr. McNabb once, just for lunch, the second day we were here. And he said, "Here's the key. Make yourself at home. These people will be wonderful to you. Enjoy. Do it your own way." And I thought to myself, here is a great person. Just a great person for what he has done, what he's done with you, this wonderful place. And I'm going to carry that vision, that person with me for a long time. And we may never speak again, I don't know. But I know that I have met a great person. He has crossed my road. And being here among you is doing something more than I could have imagined too. There's a crossroad happening here for me. I think I used to dream often about having to leave a great city, and I always thought it was London. It looked a lot like London, and I would dream this recurring dream of knowing it was the last day and you had to leave, and you had to pack up, and you had to go into a narrow line and pass through a turnstile and get on an airplane, and the dream always ends with flying off into the darkness back towards home with a profound sense of sadness. And I was thinking about the dream. It recurs for me, has for several years. And as I was walking across the bridge the other day, I turned to Elspeth and I said, "What if it's Melbourne? What if it isn't London at all? What if it's Melbourne? And this is part of the dream?" It just bids thinking about, doesn't it? And so there has been a crossing here of my road with the great road, and I don't know fully what it means yet, but I'm going to take it home and gestate on it, because occasionally you receive these gifts along the way, and this is being one of them for me. Well, the incident on the Emmaus Road in Luke comes at a time of catastrophe. You've risked everything, and you've put yourself out there, and you've trusted with all your heart, and then your own culture, the group you've trusted all your life, turned on you and put to death that thing that brought you life. Communities of faith have always had to fight against that kind of devastation, you know, because in every generation we must prove ourselves again, bear witness again, change our inflection again, to lift up that standard which means so much to us, that bright banner which means so much to us. In every generation we face such devastation. Robert Raines, my great American friend who is now in his 90s, remembers in his 50s, after his father, a Methodist bishop and a very powerful man, had died, remembers feeling the sort of the backwash of that experience. He said his wife was lecturing somewhere and he'd driven off for the afternoon, and he came across a senior citizen's home, and he drove through the parking lot and sat by the water's edge, and his life caved in on him. He wrote, "Only dreams, songs, and poems can help me escape from the dread of death and the fear of life, but my dreams are hidden from me now. My poetry is dried up, and songs sink into sighs." Have you ever felt that on your road, when catastrophe hit you and all the things you dreamed about and loved were suddenly taken from you? I'm sure you have. This was the Messiah of grace and truth, they said. He has been thrown overboard to drown in our own culture. Our culture missed his significance, and we are all the losers because of it. Tragic. And there they were, walking along that road, away from Jerusalem, a way of escape, and they were in the presence of another suddenly. They just suddenly realized that they were in a bigger world than they thought. The world which had collapsed on them opened just slightly, and they could feel a cold breeze coming from somewhere, blowing on their faces. And it was wonderful. They began to talk to each other about the deep things of their lives. Then they began to tell the story again, says Luke. He was ours. He was deeply one of us. Oh, he was so clear and so charismatic and so truthful too, and gentle. But underneath it, he possessed the courage of a lion. Oh, we rose in him. Do you remember? We rose in him as never before. And then the companion who had joined them unrecognized asked them about the details, and then began to tell them about the long wave of faith. It's always important to hear about the long wave of faith. There is always joy and then sadness as well in the long wave of faith, creativity and then trauma. There are parts of the quest of faith which are pleasant to enjoy, and parts which are as steep as a cliff up which we must climb. And not everything along the way is heroic. There are real lives that run into real drama and real trouble sometimes. Oh, in the end, when we're writing the story, we always write the heroic parts, but underneath it, it is men and women and children exactly like us, just like us, working at the mystery of it all, being touched by it every now and then. It's the real stories that are perhaps the most interesting. We all know that Ludwig van Beethoven ended up deaf, and at the end of his life was unable to hear his own music, except in his head, was unable to hear the adulation of his own music. But did you know that J.S. Bach died a blind man? He had been operated on by a surgeon who blinded him. And that years later, George Frederick Handel, the great composer, died as a blind man. He had been operated on by an eye surgeon who had taken his sight from him, and that it was the same surgeon in both cases. I didn't know that. This is part of the real life, not just the glory of the music, but the tragedy, the wave, the long wave that goes up and down. It's real for all of us. And then they shared a meal, says Luke. It was a familiar meal to them. A bit of bread, a bit of wine, some conversation, And then suddenly they realized in whose presence they always were, the great road setting itself under their little broken road.